Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Santilli. I head up SCIP, Strategic Consortium of Intelligence Professionals, and welcome to our next edition of our iStream podcast. I'm very pleased to have Miguel Jimenez here. He's from the Association of Professional Futurists. Miguel, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Paul.
I want to start the conversation off with really talking about APF, the Association of Professional Futurists. What is that association all about?
Well, the APF is a non-profit. It's in the US. Also, it's a US organization, and basically it's a group of professionals, of people that are working with futures, with foresight, in order to anticipate what might happen next. It's 20 years old. It was founded in 2002. It's very small in size, and it's been growing very slowly, because basically foresight is like a new tool. The future and futurism is like a new tool in the business environment. So it's been growing slowly. We are around 700 members, more or less, now, in many different countries. A lot less than SCIP. We are like 54 countries. But we are just trying to set the professional context for foresight and futurism to happen in organizations, and we are working in there since the last 20 years.
So when you say foresight in organizations, is this primarily in a business context, or is it in a societal context, government context, throughout more of the social economic landscape of the globe? I mean, all of the above, or how does that segment out?
Well, basically, it's there are many different schools of thought in foresight of future studies. So one of them is regarding the naming, for example. You usually refer to future studies when you are talking about more the academic side of it. So you're looking at the methods, the tools, the research, etc. Foresight is when you are applying it, usually, then you have a strategic foresight, which is for the corporate environment, but then you also have foresight for policy making. So the issue with the field, with futures as a field of study or practice, is that it's so broad that it can be applied to everything. It goes with the innate human capability of thinking ahead of time to prepare for something. And we've been doing that as humans since the origins of humanity. We started to plan for the next harvest. We knew when to plant, when to seed, in order to get the ripe fruit or produce by some months after that. So that was foresight. Now we are doing that in corporate environments. We're deciding for social change, social policies, changing governments, defining very wicked problems like climate change. So you need to look into the future the same way that we were looking into agriculture or planting wheat in that sense. So we look for that in that sense. So it's very difficult to set the context, but mostly it usually works in corporate and government bodies at this moment.
I like the aspect that when you talked about planning for crops and planning in the future, and I think there's a dichotomy between business, which in the U.S. is usually quarterly focused, when I think what you're talking about is more long-term horizons on how things can change holistically and on a systemic level, like you're talking about climate change or about shifts in global dominance of certain countries and aspects around that. It could be supply chain issues, it could be technology driven, these sorts of things, which I think is very interesting because it's taking a much broader, much longer perspective of the view rather than, hey, what's going to happen next quarter? That kind of thing.
And that is usually one of the key issues with foresight when you think about the future, is that we are too focused on the short term.
Of course.
What are we going to do by the end of the month, by the end of the quarter, by the end of the year? And then we have a strategy for next year. So my question is, what is going to be different next year? So your strategy needs to change. Because this year is already pretty good. So are there so many changes? So next year is a complete different strategy, or are we just tweaking a little bit? Now, when you think about the context of change, change happened every time, in every moment of human history. Change is happening, change is there. Now, people say, and what we used to feel now is like, what is changing is the nature of change. So change is there. It's been there
right,
always.
but it's a different context of how change is occurring.
The way it changes, the way change is changing things. It's faster because we are more connected. Things are connected
and more prolific. It impacts more of a larger scope. The scale is much larger.
You remember this vessel that was stuck in the Red Sea in the Suez Channel?
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
So
right.
That disrupted everything.
Yeah. That small thing,
and
right?
it was just a tiny single.
Yeah.
I mean, not tiny.
But
it's a huge boat.
I get it.
But it was only one out of the thousands of
the
boats
context
that
of
we
the
have.
scope, it was very small.
And it was just stuck in there. They weren't able to shift it in any way or turn it around, and it collapsed the whole of the supply chain for a couple of months. And the price of a container in one of those vessels multiplied 10 or 20 folds.
From this minor disruption.
And it's a single minor thing, but it affected the European economy, the US economy, the global traffic on the ocean, the relationship between China and the Western economies, Africa.
The domino effect that just completely permeates throughout.
So that is the new context of change. It's very single tiny things can affect very diverse elements in remote aspects of anything. And you are, as a tiny shop in Kentucky or in Madrid, you are affected by that because suddenly in that boat is the next piece that you were using to repair something for your customer at the local level. So we look at this type of changes, not only the disruption itself, which is just one evidence, one occurrence of things, but what we look when we think about the future is about what are the possible outcomes, because we are always biased towards thinking that this is going to be happening. We are super optimistic about the results. We are going to do this amount of sales, and suddenly it's not that way. It's more difficult, and things happen in the middle, and you are not so good selling, not so good producing, not so good doing things. What happened when things don't go the way you thought? What are the other possibilities that were there, but you were not looking at them? So that is future's about. It's not about having a right answer. It's about having an array of multiple answers so we can prepare for more than one, just in case. Just in case it's not the one that we wish. The one that occurs, is happening, that occurs. But if we prepare for 3 of them, we have more possibilities of being right. And maybe we are just wasting some time for those opportunities, but we will always, we will always complain about something we knew might happen, but we did nothing about.
Of course.
But it's better to prepare and say, I didn't need to use this.
You can apply weights to the probability aspects of these different scenarios too. So you mentioned a number of things, and I've got a whole bunch of light bulbs in my head about things I want to ask you. But let's go back to the disruption, because that's something that's very near and dear to my heart in terms of managing disruption from an intelligence perspective. And what I mean by that is I refer to disruption as basically perpetual. Disruption is always occurring. It's the amplitude of the disruption that really can affect your behavior in your business. So a flat tire on your delivery truck is a disruption. It's a minor disruption. A supply chain shortage of parts is a larger disruption. A COVID instance or a war, these are huge magnitude of disruptions. And that could have an outcome on your behaviors and how things permeate from that. But that's in context with the future's perspective is always very interesting to me, because I've had conversations on both sides of the fence. And what I mean by that is I've talked to leaders and organizations that say, you know what, the whole aspect about a 5-year plan is gone. The way COVID has taught us that things can change so dramatically overnight that a 5-year plan is pretty much useless. And then I've heard the other side that says we have to plan further out. And maybe it's in this futures context by which we have to plan 5, 10, 15 years out and really look at these forward-looking permutations of scenarios that really say, here's all the things that can happen based upon all of these signals we've seen out in the marketplace, macro trends and technology and roadmaps and things like that. We have to plan in that context. and seeing what we can really do. So, well, there's two schools of thought that I've encountered. The no sort of, man, we can't plan that far out, the world is too dynamic, to the one that says, boy, we really need to plan even further out. How do you relate to those? How do you compile a medium and that makes sense of that?
Yeah, so I agree with those two ways of thinking. I've been playing myself with permutations of scenarios, adding like a simple list of 200 possible disruptions or mega trends that we see happening, and do all the permutations by combining them in backs of 16. So if you take all those elements in there, it's a huge number. So how can I plan for that? It's millions of them.
Permutations,
so it's millions.
Permutations,
infinite. I mean, they are finite because we know the numbers.
But it's a lot.
But it's so big that there is no way to write that down.
It's a factorial aspect.
So it's at the human scale, it's infinite. So it's impossible. So how can you plan for all those things? It's impossible, and also it's very overwhelming in the way when you start to see all of those things and try to think, what can I do? What will I do?
What's the next steps? Because it's too much. You're trying to boil the ocean or whatever metaphor you want to use. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so much. Where do I begin?
It's impossible. Yeah. So on the other side, I also agree with the statement that why should I plan for anything if everything can be broken? Everything can disappear.
So it's extreme
overnight.
of one side and the extreme on the other side, which doesn't help anybody.
But in the middle, there is one opportunity for agileness. So being more agile, being more adaptive.
Nimble.
So you can test that resilience aspect of how can my structures, how can my company survive without a supplier for 3 months? And then maybe it's not 3 months. The COVID, personally, it hit me a lot. We travel, we do a lot of things at the personal level and the business level. And you expect that to be something like a flu, something between 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And suddenly it was like 6 months and then another
permanent
6 months
almost,
and then another year. And then it's like, oh, wow, it's been 2 years and we are still not having a normal situation, whether it's back to normal, new normal, a different normal or whatever, but it was not stable anymore. And since then, it hasn't been stable. So what you do in that situation is test yourself for resiliency and agility. How fast can I react? How fast can I shift people from one place to another? Shift departments, shift structure, shift business. And in order to do that, first you need to imagine what is your next business.
Of course.
What is your next structure? What can my people do in a different way? Can they do it from a different place? So all those questions, all those reasonings about a future that might happen is rehearsing. So most of the work that we do in Foresight is rehearsing about the future that might happen. Maybe it never happens, but if you rehearse, you are giving your mind, your organization, the time to reflect, probably and not in a workshop.
And assimilate also.
Assimilate that something like that might happen. Maybe, COVID was the best example. COVID did great things for Foresight because people worried about, we need to think about the future. So it's one of the possible good outputs of COVID in that sense. But the interesting part is, how are we rehearsing more stuff? COVID we knew about something like that happening. There were many cases. It was not a black zone. It was documented. It was on list of risk. It was there. The issue is no one was rehearsing for that, because no one thought it was a priority in that sense. So if it's not a priority and you don't consider that a priority, how can you prepare for that? How can you be more agile in that way? There's no way. First, you need to recognize that there are things that might happen even when today you believe that thing will never happen. So you need to be open for, okay, this is my position, this is my stance. Nothing is going to move me from here because I understand everything that I'm doing. So I'm very fixed in here. This is non-movable. Even in that situation, be open to say, but just in case, what might happen if A, B, C, D,
Right.
So you put a list of things. So just by thinking that out loud with your executive leadership team, you are helping them to imagine and rehearse what might they do? What might I do with my department? Oh,
It puts the seed in their mind. That's something they wouldn't be thinking about otherwise.
yeah.
So you mentioned two words that I really like. The first word is one of my favorite words that's very much underused in organizational preparedness and behavior is resilience. I love the word resilience, especially from not only a futures perspective, from an intelligence perspective. Because if you have the infrastructure that allows you to be resilient, nimble, flexible, adaptable, that is, I think, one of the major learnings that came out of COVID is those organizations that were resilient are the ones that survived. And the ones that actually grew, used COVID as a growth enabler during that time frame. The other term that you just introduced to me that I really liked is this rehearsal aspect. Because I think, as you're saying, it puts the acting out the behavior of something that you only saw on paper or you only theorized, but now you're acting it out. And that is, I think, is a very interesting perspective when you talk about scenario planning and actually putting in, okay, about these thousands of permutations, let's apply some weights and try to look at likelihood and Pareto the thing out and say, okay, now we have 10. Out of the 10, 6. What does the 6 look like? Albeit that's, it's a bell shape, there's going to be 20% on each side that doesn't fit. But that 60% in the middle is most likely given the circumstances that we were able to use, doing analytics and so forth on the data. So now you can play out in this rehearsal context of your thing, which I think is very cool, those 6 scenarios and determine how we want to behave and what's the practice and the behavior. There's a concept, and I've talked to, APF is an affiliate of SCIP, and maybe I should have prefaced that at the beginning of this conversation. And Tanya has been a champion of SCIP. She's actually on the SCIP advisory board, a colleague of Miguel's at APF. And she and I have had the conversation about systems thinking. And looking at the entire thing about where if you move the knob or the lever here, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens down here, right? So you really have to be cognizant and aware of how these different permutations in the system can affect the overall system as a whole. And I love the fact that this rehearsal gives you the ability to do that in a testing environment, in a virtual environment almost. So I really like that concept. Have I represented that accurately?
Yeah. No, that is accurate. But I want to highlight one thing about resiliency. Resiliency goes hand in hand with agility or adaptability.
Yes.
So there is 2 things. You can be resilient in 2 ways. One is you just stay there, put your helmet on, and you just resisting the storm, and it's hard. So it's like, yes, you survive, but you don't move. You just there like an armadillo in the desert, just very hard in the place. So you resist to change, but you prepared for the winter.
Right.
So you can prepare for the winter, but you can also thrive in winter.
Right.
So that is agility. You can be resilient by adapting to the emerging change.
Yes.
And that is a more Darwinian approach to it.
Yeah.
It's like you need to change because you don't know if you're going back to the previous situation. So what happens if now the winter is the new normality?
Yeah.
So in that case, just staying there warm in the cave is not helping you. You need to change.
The resiliency with the adaptability and the agility.
The 2 of them.
Yes, I agree.
And
I think
people sometimes say, no, we are just planning for resiliency, which is great.
Yeah.
It's great.
But
it's better than nothing.
The end result, you're going to be in a different world. And are you going to be applicable anymore? You're going to be, relevant in that space, right?
And
I like that. I like that combination.
And I think that we were lucky enough in our generation to live in a moment of really nice stability and growth. But that is like a coincidence in the history of human life. There's never been such a moment in time where everything was growing and everything was thriving and everyone was increasing income and wealth and everything. So everything improved a lot in the last 30, 40, 50 years everywhere. Since the poorest country to the richer country, everything is way better in both of them than it was 50 years ago. But maybe this is just the only time we're seeing that. Is the next generation going to see that? Because we are teaching them what they can expect, and we are not teaching them how to become agile. What happens if you don't find a job 9 to 5, Monday to Friday? What happens if you have to work in a different way? What happens if you have to be an
different skill sets?
Different skill set, different technologies, different contexts. What happens if climate change is actually hitting us harder and we need to go on shorts every day because it's too hot that we cannot go, or we move to northern latitudes so it's colder.
Or opposite.
So we are assuming that everything is going to be like the life we lived, and maybe it's not. But we are teaching the next generation the same way because we don't let them rehearse about what might be different in the future. We're just teaching them the skills that we got for our future
that we've only known. Right, yes. Miguel, the context you used about futures and about the scenarios and the different normalizations and things that we've been talking about, I think is right on. I mean, it's very, it requires people to have a different mindset when they think about how behaviors are going to be changing, given these disruptive activities and the perpetualness of a disruption and the amplitudes of the disruptions themselves. Let's bring this back into the intelligence context. Intelligence being used toward futures development, how can we utilize the intelligence aspects and the data-driven intelligence to aid us as a catalyst toward futures scenarios and developments? What's some of your perspectives in that?
I mean, futures intelligence is one of the concepts that we are promoting beyond Foresight. Foresight is the ability to see things, and that is great. And it's giving you some glimpse on what might happen in the future. Each of those pieces is intel about the future. Some of them might be right, some of them might be wrong, more accurate, less accurate. But you can use that intel in order to create better strategies today, better actions today, better decisions. The issue that corporations have at this moment is that they have a very fragmented way of looking into intelligence. They have business intelligence, usually talking about operations, how we do things, the processes and all this stuff. They have market intelligence about what the consumers are saying in my specific industry and how they are expecting my company or my competitors, my sector, to respond to those needs. Then you have things like corporate intelligence or competitive intelligence. How are we competing in the market to those that are selling the same products that we are selling? But they have different pieces of intelligence, but no one is never asking if your product, your service, whatever you do today is going to make sense in 20 years. So for example, we know that we are shifting towards less fossil fuels vehicles. Electrification seems to be the present push. It's like the biggest trend. Now there are some questions in there. We know a few things about electrification. Infrastructure. It's not easy to charge your vehicle when you are on the road. So maybe it's good for shorter periods of time. Weather. If it's cold, it's very difficult to charge a car. If it's too hot, it's too difficult to charge a car. So there's something that
some limitations on that technology.
We also know that we don't have enough resources on Earth to make batteries to replace every single car that we have today. So we know that we need to find a new way to store energy or increase the density of storage or remove cars. But we know some pieces of that. Now, what are the car makers doing with that information? They did not change their product. Yes, now you have electric, hybrid, you mix two engines and these type of things, but they are not shifting the model of one person, one car. And they are not shifting the expectation of selling a certain number of cars every year. So they are looking for the traditional way of selling more cars every year because there is going to be more people in there. But all the intelligence that we have about the future is different. Now, market is telling you a different thing. Consumer is telling you that they want more sustainable cars. Competitive is pushing a lot of companies like Japanese car makers or European car makers, American car makers, because China is pushing very hard and very cheaply on the car industry. What are we doing? We put tariffs. We don't know what to do, so we put a fence, and the fence is protecting us. But we saw this coming 15 years ago.
Yes, of course.
So where was the intelligence on the future that we could see at that moment? So at that point in time in the corporation, it was missing.
Right. No, you bring up several good points, and I think a lot of this, the variability in your technology roadmaps, which is what you're suggesting, I think, is a lot of times driven not only by profit, but also by political.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about the electric car. We can use that example because now in the US, for example, they're starting to see limitations, as you pointed out, the replacement value and the longevity and the damage to the roads because it's so much heavier and all these other infrastructure issues, the grid that's required and all that. But we're also seeing that there's some companies transitioning to different alternative fuels like hydrogen. You know, that sort of behavior. So there's not only the technology change, but also, like you're saying, the one car, one person sort of context in other parts of the world needs to be re-examined to look at more of the mass transit sort of aspects. And those are all the different types of permutation like you're talking about. And then China, of course, we've seen them kind of run and do their own thing in terms of setting their own stage and what's own path, what's best for China in a lot of contexts, and that's another conversation. But I love how you're framing this up, because what you're talking about, again, what I should expect from a futures perspective is that you are looking at this thing very holistically, very systemic. And that, I think, is a very challenging perspective that a lot of people don't see, because they're so focused on the here and now, quarterly profits, what are we doing today, rather than taking a step back and saying, how does all this work? And let me look over the mountain and see where the landscape looks like. And then how are we going to get from here to there?
And you forget one thing in there.
What's that?
That we've been educated and trained vertically to be experts on one thing.
Yes.
So if my only expertise is creating engines, combustion engines, there is no way for me to think out of that box.
Yes,
so
exactly.
What you need in thinking about the future is a more diverse educational background where we have less vertical expertise and more horizontal expertise, or at least a combination of two individuals that are vertical and horizontal.
So that horizontal element is a key point. I'm going to make that as the last point here before we kind of wrap this up, but because this conversation is actually, we can go on hours, I think, on this. I love what you're providing and the perspective you're giving. There's a context that we coined in SCIP a few years back called the intelligence strategist. And that was somebody who doesn't look at intelligence like this, but somebody who actually looks at the intelligence from a horizontal element. How do all of the different activities relate to the intelligence discipline? And what does something happening in product markets, let's take a business context, product marketing, how does that affect your supply chain? How does that affect your purchasing? How does that affect your distribution? All of these things in the horizontal element, rather than just looking at the individual task itself. So I love that wide angle perspective and applying that in the intelligence space, I think is really the crucial element. And I think that we as an intelligence professionals really need to start adapting our thought processes around that sort of perspective, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, completely agree.
Excellent. So I'm going to want to wrap this up then. This has been an incredible conversation. Miguel, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you, Paul.
I'd like to do a part 2 at a later time.
We can always
there's some great stuff that I would love to actually continue to probe with you in these different areas. But again, I think it was a great conversation. I really loved what you had to say, and I want to thank you again for being a part of our SCIP iStream series.
Thank you so much, and I hope the audience enjoys this.
Thank you.